In the late 1930s, the world was marching toward another great conflict. Across the Pacific, Japan was expanding its empire. In Europe, Hitler's armies rolled across borders unchecked. And in America's shipyards, the foundations of a new generation of warships were being laid. Among them stood a ship destined for greatness, yet fated to be forgotten. Her name was USS Washington, BB-56. Commissioned in May 1941, the Washington was a North Carolina-class battleship built at a time when naval power still meant steel giants armed with massive guns. She stretched over 700 feet in length, carried 9 16-inch guns, and could hurl a 1-ton shell more than 20 miles. But her true genius lay not just in her weapons. It was in her design. She was fast, sleek, and one of the first American battleships to incorporate radar fire control systems, a new technology that would soon change naval warfare forever. Yet, from the very beginning, fate had other plans. As Washington joined the fleet, aircraft carriers were already taking center stage. The attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 had crippled America's battleship force, proving that airplanes, not armor, would decide the war's outcome. The once glorious battleships suddenly looked like relics from another era. Still, Washington trained relentlessly. Her captain, Glenn Davis, and her task force commander, Admiral Willis Lee, saw the ship's potential. They drilled the crew for night engagements, radar targeting, and coordinated gunnery, things no battleship force had ever done before. The sailors aboard began to sense that they were part of something unique, something the rest of the Navy didn't yet understand. Washington's early months were quiet. Convoy escorts, patrols, and routine exercises. She was a sleeping giant, overshadowed by headlines about carrier raids and submarine warfare. But in late 1942, destiny called her name. The brutal campaign for Guadalcanal was reaching a breaking point. American Marines were trapped, their airfield under constant Japanese attack. Reinforcements and supplies were desperately needed. To save the island, the Navy would have to face the Imperial Japanese Fleet, a Navy that had perfected night battles. The mission was suicidal. Yet Admiral Lee and his radar-equipped battleship were sent into those dark waters. The USS Washington's moment had finally come, and in one night of chaos and courage, she would etch her name into history, though few would remember it.
By November 1942, the waters around Guadalcanal were known as Iron Bottom Sound, named for the dozens of warships already resting beneath its surface. 2 massive night battles had already ended in disaster for the Americans. The Navy's faith in its battleships was shaken. Yet, against all odds, the USS Washington was ordered into those same cursed waters. The mission's objective was simple but near impossible: protect Henderson Field, the only American airbase on the island, from a Japanese bombardment. If the field fell, the entire Guadalcanal campaign would collapse. The Marines on shore had no idea that their survival depended on 2 American battleships, Washington and South Dakota, and 4 destroyers. The Japanese force approaching was powerful: 2 battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, all experienced veterans of night combat. They were led by Vice Admiral Kondo Nobutake, one of Japan's best tacticians. He believed the Americans had no answer to Japan's mastery of night fighting. He didn't know that Washington's radar would change everything. Inside the American flagship, tension was electric. Admiral Willis Lee, a calm, brilliant Kentuckian, studied his radar screens. He had spent years experimenting with radar gunnery, long before anyone believed it could work. Now it was about to be tested in real combat. Lee's quiet confidence steadied the crew. But others in the Navy weren't so sure. Washington and South Dakota represented the last hope of the old Navy. If they failed, battleships would forever be dismissed as obsolete. In the background, carrier admirals were already writing off the big guns, seeing them as outdated dinosaurs. As the American ships moved into position, the night was blacker than ink. The sea was calm, but every man aboard could sense death nearby. Japanese float planes droned overhead, their flares briefly illuminating the water. The destroyers Preston, Walk, Benham, and Gwynn moved ahead, preparing to make the first contact. Then radar contacts appeared, blips on the screen. Admiral Lee had eyes on the enemy long before they even knew he was there. But the Japanese formation was tight, disciplined, and deadly. The Americans were walking into a trap, or so it seemed. In the darkness, Iron Bottom Sound was about to witness a battle that would decide not just the fate of Guadalcanal, but the future of battleships themselves.
At 2300 hours, November 14, 1942, the USS Washington's radar operator reported, "Contacts bearing 270, range 18,000 yards. The enemy was coming fast." Moments later, the lead American destroyer spotted gun flashes. The sea erupted. The Japanese destroyers and cruisers poured fire into the thin American screen. USS Walk and USS Preston were hit almost immediately. Their decks became infernos. Men threw themselves overboard as their ships sank within minutes. In the chaos, South Dakota, Washington's sister ship, was struck by shells that knocked out her electrical systems. She went dark, a burning silhouette illuminated by her own fires. To the Japanese, it looked like the Americans were finished. But one ship remained unseen. The Washington, guided by radar, had not yet opened fire. Admiral Lee waited, calm, deliberate. When the radar picture was clear, he gave the order, "Open fire." The night exploded with thunder. 9 16-inch guns roared, lighting the sky with orange flame. Washington's first salvos straddled the enemy battleship Kirishima, one of Japan's most feared capital ships. Radar-guided accuracy meant every salvo was deadlier than the last. Within minutes, 2,700-pound shells tore through Kirishima's hull. Her turrets jammed. Her rudder was blown apart. Fires raged from bow to stern. Washington's gunners, trained to perfection, reloaded and fired with mechanical precision. Each broadside shook the ocean. The Japanese formation fell into confusion. Their searchlights swept the dark, but they couldn't see their attacker. Kirishima's captain tried to maneuver, but found his ship crippled. One final shell smashed into her engine room, sealing her fate. She began to roll, mortally wounded. At 23,000 yards, Washington shifted fire to the fleeing cruisers and destroyers. In less than 10 minutes, she had single-handedly destroyed a battleship and forced an entire Japanese task force to retreat. When the firing stopped, the sea was silent again, except for the crackle of burning oil and the cries of survivors. The Washington's decks were untouched. She had not taken a single hit. Admiral Lee turned to his officers and said quietly, "Gentlemen, let's retire from Iron Bottom Sound."
By dawn, the extent of the victory became clear. Kirishima had capsized and sunk. 2 Japanese destroyers were gone. Their surviving ships limped back to base, too damaged to continue the mission. Henderson Field and the Marines on Guadalcanal were saved. Washington returned to port as the hero of the Pacific. Her crew expected celebration, headlines, maybe even a presidential citation. But what they got was silence. The Navy was uneasy. Publicly celebrating a battleship victory, they feared, would contradict the new narrative that aircraft carriers were the future. The bureaucrats wanted to push forward, not look back. So, the Washington's night of triumph was buried in after-action reports, overshadowed by carrier battles like Midway and Coral Sea. But the men who were there knew the truth. Washington had faced impossible odds, surrounded, outnumbered, her destroyer screen destroyed, her sister ship crippled, and emerged victorious. She had proved that radar and discipline could defeat even Japan's elite night-fighting force. After Guadalcanal, Washington went on to fight in nearly every major Pacific campaign: the Philippines, the Marianas, and Okinawa. She bombarded shore defenses, guarded carriers, and even rammed another battleship, the Indiana, in a brutal nighttime collision that nearly tore her bow apart. But she always came back. And through it all, she kept her flawless record. No enemy shell ever struck her in combat. Not one. Yet, despite her unmatched performance, Washington never became a legend like the Missouri or the Iowa. There were no newsreels, no post-war parades. Her name quietly faded from public memory, even though she had saved an entire campaign and redefined naval warfare.
When the war ended in 1945, the USS Washington came home to a changed Navy. The era of battleships was over. Carriers ruled the seas, and jet aircraft had rendered big guns obsolete. The ship that once turned the tide at Guadalcanal was now just another relic of the past. She was decommissioned in 1947 and placed in reserve, her massive guns silent, her decks empty. For years she sat moored, slowly rusting, until finally, in 1961, she was sold for scrap. The ship that had done everything asked of her, and more, was quietly dismantled and forgotten. But among historians and sailors, her legacy endures. USS Washington wasn't just another battleship. She was proof that training, leadership, and technology could overcome even the most desperate odds. Her victory at Guadalcanal saved the Marines, saved the campaign, and proved that radar could turn darkness into daylight. Admiral Willis Lee never sought glory for himself. He remained the same calm, analytical man until his death in 1945. Many say he embodied the ship's spirit, brilliant, effective, and unrecognized. Today, few remember the USS Washington, but for those who study naval history, she remains a symbol of what true excellence looks like: quiet, relentless, and unshakable. She never lost a battle. She never failed her crew. And though time has tried to erase her story, the truth remains. The USS Washington was the most underrated American battleship of World War II, a warrior that fought in silence and won the night.